Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Happy St. George's Day to all my English friends. Richard Littlejohn writes in the Daily Mail, fingers on buzzers, here is your starter for 10. What's the significance of today, Friday, April the 23rd? No conferring. I'm going to have to hurry you. Anybody? Sorry, time's up. The answer is St. George's Day. You could be forgiven for not knowing. Surveys regularly show that fewer than half the English can name the date we're supposed to celebrate our patron saint. Don't worry if you're one of them. I'm not sure I could have told you either off the top of my head, not without phoning a friend. There's nothing new in any of this. 25 years ago yesterday, I was a guest at the spring lunch of the Lord Taverners, full of ruddy-faced gentlemen of a certain age, consumed with lust for the guest speaker, that quintessential English rose, Virginia Bottomley, then Secretary of State for Heritage. Out of interest, I asked a few of the chaps around my table if they knew when St. George's Day was. None had the faintest idea. How can I possibly recall this so accurately, given that half the time I can't remember what happened last week? It's only thanks to my friend Mitch Murray, who was rummaging through some old papers the other day when he stumbled across a yellowed cutting from the Daily Mail dated Tuesday, April the 23rd, 1996. The headline declares, "To be English in England today is almost a criminal offense." Beneath a ludicrously large byline photograph of a fresh-faced young man with masses of dark hair, the subdeck, as we say in the trade, reads, "On St. George's Day, Richard Littlejohn asks why England is now a nation that dare not speak its name." Goodness knows why Mitch kept it. Perhaps it was earmarked for the cat's litter box or the dartboard, or he simply forgot about it. I certainly hadn't read the piece since the day it was published a quarter of a century ago, but I must admit that with a few minor amendments, it could have been written yesterday. With characteristic understatement, the column contrasted the constant denigration of the English with the enthusiastic celebration of all things Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. Well, I wonder how long it will be before England is independent. We'll no longer have the millstones of Scotland and Northern Ireland around its neck. I mean, after all, the English pay for it. They pay for Scotland and Northern Ireland. As for Wales, as I say, England and Wales have been joined at the hip for about 900 years, and I expect that the Welsh will throw in their lot with the English. So, the cult of St. George the Floyd, he truly has become a religious figure. Here is a piece from Outkick.com by Joe Kinsey. Fox News correspondent Matt Finn, who has been reporting from the so-called George Floyd Square at East 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, posted a photo Thursday showing special instructions that visitors to the area are now met with, including extra special instructions for white people. And let me read it. Let me read the whole thing here. It's worth hearing all of it. This is welcome to George Floyd Square, a sacred space for community, public grief, and protest. This is where George Floyd took his last breath under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer, under the watch of 3 other officers. Enter with reverence, humility, and openness as an invited guest. Care for each other by wearing a mask and asking others to wear a mask. Honor the space as a place to connect and grieve as caring humans, for white people in particular. Decenter yourself and come to listen, learn, mourn, and witness. Remember, you are here to support, not to be supported. Be mindful of whether your volume, pace, and movements are supporting or undermining your efforts to decenter yourself. Seek to contribute to the energy of the space rather than drain it. Bring your own processing to other white folks so that you will not harm BIPOC. Consider if you want or need to take photos and post them. Do not take photos of other people without their consent. If you witness white folks doing problematic things, speak up with compassion to take the burden off of black folks and our siblings of color whenever appropriate. Seek to engage rather than escalate so that it can be a learning moment rather than a disruption. What kind of, well, first of all, I want to say about George Floyd that I've seen some people hint at the fact that couldn't a better black martyr have been found? No, I don't think so. I think that the fact that George Floyd was a lifelong thug and ugly into the bargain is a benefit and not a cost, because it is a raw display of power. We can make you venerate anyone, even this man. You know, as Miguel de Unamuno wrote famously, and I reviewed his book, Tragic Sense of Life, on the book club a few months ago, faith doesn't create martyrs. Martyrs create faith. And when you look at George Floyd and, oh, I don't know, the jogger who was limited, and I could go on and on and on, you see what this faith is. It's very clear. Oh, and here's a sign that's been posted at the entrance to the square. You are now entering the free state of George Floyd. I see he's been emanticized. Too funny. Too funny. Let's see. Dorothy Dare says, nothing like trying to stir up more trouble. I can't imagine what would happen if any place had a sign posted with special instructions for black people. Yeah, here we go again. How come they can get away with it and we can't? Well, how about we try doing something about it? John J. Mice, he may pronounce his name Meese. He says, sounds like kind advice for any place of significant historical tragedy. And this should apply to ground zero, battlefields, cemeteries, places of great speeches, I have a dream, etc., and tragic places, Dealey Plaza, USS Arizona, the balcony in Memphis, the Dakota, too many more. Oh, he slipped in John Lennon there at the last minute. How can I put this? George Floyd's death was not a tragedy. A tragedy means the fall of a great man because of a fatal flaw. Tragedy does not mean something sad, and it doesn't mean something untoward either. Turner 1415 said, what about mixed Asian, Indian, Latinos? If there are mixed with white, which rules do they follow? That's a tricky one. That is a poser. Oh, Lulu Jones says, I'm wondering what occurred there that they felt the need to put up the sign in the first place. White people being there, pretty triggering, you know. So what sort of white person, especially white man, is going to go to make a pilgrimage to George Floyd Square? A self-hating white man. And I see this as a kind of masochism, perhaps even a kind of sexual masochism. I know what kind of women would go there. I want to speak to the manager type. Well, these Karens are about to be disabused of their naivete soon enough. Soon enough. Let's have a look at the chat. Hello, and thanks to our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Hello to Palcasso88, William Hicks, Head McNeck. Palcasso88 says, got an email from Uber today telling me to get vaxxed. Did it say or else? Okay. Frothing Fanboy, hello. Pitsky. St. George the Monster. Exactly. St. George the Monster, the better to gaslight us with. Ed McNeck says, media companies celebrating whites bowing at the shrine of St. Floyd have destroyed any empathy I might have had for them once thing goes all full Haiti. William Hicks says all the choices George Floyd made in his life in the lead up to the moment when he was high and trying to pass a fake $20 bill and then lying on the pavement, but bears no responsibility for his fate. No, he doesn't, because we have learned that Black people have no agency, that everything that they do, well, the bad stuff, is the result of white supremacy. This is stated quite literally. Why do Black people in the inner cities kill each other at such high rates over trifles, real or imagined? It is the fault of white people. We are told this again and again and again. Ed McNeck says, I'm still waiting for the George Floyd-themed Nintendo Switch. Okay. Minneapolis. Never been to the place. No, yeah, I have been to the place, but it was just a bus stop, actually. I spent, an hour and a half in a layover there. Someone writing at the College Fix, Grace Bureau, says, I no longer recognize Minneapolis. I no longer want to live there. Minneapolis is my home. My happiest memories are here. It's where I learned to ride a bike, had my first date, received my high school diploma. But today I'm too afraid to even walk in my neighborhood by myself. The Ace Hardware down the street, the one that I used to bike to in the summer, robbed twice in the past 5 days. The Walgreens next to my elementary school, Molotov cocktail thrown into it. The Lake Harriet bandshell, where we spent countless Mother's Days, homeless encampment popped up next door. These are the things you don't read about in the news. 10 minutes from my house at 38th and Chicago, there is still an autonomous zone. Police are not allowed to enter. Residents have died because medical authorities couldn't get through, and carjackers, of which there are many, will speed into the zone to escape officer pursuit. My favorite dinner theater canceled its production of Cinderella because it was too white. My church, my beloved tiny Lutheran church, organized social justice marches for our congregation while refusing to reinstate in-person services. They're still virtual, by the way. And how about the week of the 2020 riots? We lived under a curfew for days while looters seemingly roamed freely. Friends fled their home at 3:30 a.m. because the auto parts store behind them was on fire. And then we watched in horror as our city council members demanded that the city defund the police as they hired armed security for themselves. I no longer recognize Minneapolis. I no longer want to live there. We are done, and I am leaving. I spent the past year watching this city crumble. Burning it wasn't enough, I guess. Every day I watched another piece of sanity and stability fall to the hysterical, bloodthirsty, self-righteous mob. Who's responsible for this? Who elected Keith Ellison as Attorney General of Minnesota? Why, that would be Minnesotans. Who elected Jacob Fry as the mayor of Minneapolis? Why, that would be Minneapolians, or whatever they're called. Who elected Keith Ellison's even crazier son to the city council of Minneapolis? Well, that would be the people of Minneapolis, wouldn't it? You know, I'm tempted to lament the fate of Minneapolis or Portland or Seattle. I've spent some time in Portland. I've spent an awful lot of time in Seattle. Suppose I could lament the fate of my own city of Victoria, but the fact is the people who live here voted for the idiots who are destroying it. And I'm going to be talking about Andy Ngo's book about Antifa at 5:30 Pacific time. But keep in mind, in the last mayoral election in Portland, Ted Wheeler, who was a great deal responsible for the destruction of Portland, was reelected. What about the alternatives? Well, the official alternative was even crazier than he is, and she only lost because there was a write-in candidate who got something like 13% of the vote, who was even crazier than she was. Yes, this is the world that they made. John Zmirak, who was briefly my editor, well, he edited a piece of mine when he was the editor of Tacky Mag, has a piece, After Derek Chauvin, we see America's Choice, a Great Awakening, or a Spanish-style civil war. Nobody ought to be happy about what recent police interactions with Black Americans has told us about our country. Wait, I take that back. There's a short list of Americans who take comfort in it. This is on stream.org. Executives of companies that operate private prisons, drug dealers looking for new young recruits to peddle their wares, abortionists eager for customers, pharmaceutical companies hungry for fresh, tiny lungs and eyes from unborn kids of any color, red and yellow, black and white, were just tissue in their sight. But in practice, most of the donors will be brown or black and the customers mostly white. Far left public employee unions, which rely on expanding social chaos to grow their ranks of social workers, diversity trainers, and addiction counselors. Enemies of the United States, who want to see us weak and divided and count on rudderless young men to join their ranks, maybe as jihadists. Dealers in illegal, untraceable guns. Race hustlers on the left like Louis Farrakhan and on the right like David Duke. Demagogic leftists whose careers depend on Black American Christians getting trapped in angry, futile tribalism, putting the race above faith or patriotism as surely as any Klansman ever did. David Duke, come on, John. Yeah, I know you're looking for a parallel there, but the KKK was infiltrated by the FBI decades ago. It is a spent force. Let's see. People will learn, Zamirak writes. Get out. Forget your pension. Find another job now. Maybe as an armed security guard for some Hollywood celebrity who makes shoot-'em-up movies and campaigns for gun control. You're on the line to keep the lid on a boiling cauldron of nightmarish dysfunction, and while the public relies on you, it will never have your back. If you can't get out, transfer to the suburbs. Those homes are likely broken too, but the boys there have more to lose, and they know it. They fully expect to get nice white-collar jobs and be divorced dads like their fathers. If you can't escape working in a city with lots of poor people, try to avoid doing your job. If you see Black people fighting, don't get involved. Let them beat up, stab, even shoot each other. If you try to stop them, even to save the helpless and innocent, you're liable to ruin your life. Ruin your life or lose it. So to heck with it. Concentrate on busting graffiti artists, hassling drunks, and finding the best donuts and coffee available in the area until you get that transfer to Highland Park or Rodeo Drive. And yes, he concludes, in the long run, the choice is a new great awakening between new great awakening and a Spanish-style civil war. I pray we make all the right choices. In the meantime, I'll hold on to my prayer books and my AR-15. This is from Citizen Free Press, where we learn that one of the jurors said that she didn't want any, yes, I did not want to go through rioting and destruction again. And I was concerned about people coming to my house if they were not happy with the verdict. So there we have confirmation of jury tampering. Oh, no, that can't possibly happen. Oh, why didn't the judge sequester the jury from the beginning? Oh, no, they're not going to find out what's going on out there. They're not? Really? I'm sure even the stupidest ones knew how important a case this was and how they were the 12 who were deciding Chauvin's fate, and they could figure out the rest. The trial should have never taken place in Hennepin County. It should have been moved to another jurisdiction. Derek Hunter writes in Town Hall, can we be honest about Democrats and George Floyd? To hear Democrats talk about George Floyd, you think the greatest father and friend ever to live, which seems like an odd distinction for a drug-addicted career criminal who was killed while resisting arrest as he had massive amounts of fentanyl in his system, was murdered in cold blood. I say this as someone not invested in the fate of Derek Chauvin or outraged by the verdict, just simply as an observer of the last year and an avid consumer of media and political coverage. George Floyd should not have died, but he did just about everything possible in the lead up to his death, which he could have prevented had he simply complied. No honest person can deny that, but a lot of dishonest people do. Floyd was going to be arrested. It's as simple as that. He tried to pass off a phony $20 bill. If you did that, you'd be arrested too, and you should be. But George, like everyone else, didn't want to go to jail, only he fought police to try to prevent it. Why can't we call that the stupid that it was? The vast majority of the tiny minority of police brutality cases the media obsessively reports on have that as a common denominator. Dante Wright was getting arrested for an outstanding warrant and decided to fight with police in an attempt to get away. It's incredibly stupid and self-defeating, and it was ultimately fatal for Wright. To think even if he'd escaped at that moment that he would have gotten away with something. Police had his name. They were arresting him. After all, if somehow he'd fought his way out of that moment, he would have been arrested in the future and faced his original charges and new ones. The police officer in that case made the stupid and quite possibly criminal mistake of pulling her gun rather than her taser and killing Dante Wright. In the heat of the moment, in the middle of the fight, that mistake is understandable, but still likely inexcusable. But it's not murder, manslaughter at best. Still, these deaths could have been avoided and been avoided by the people who died. It's probably dangerous to say that, but it needs to be said anyway because it is true. Yes, the Democrats, they need to pit American against American to win. It's not the message because Black lives don't matter to Democrats, but the loss of them is useful. Not the loss of any Black lives. In fact, it's very few. But those few give Democrats a lot of mileage. All they have to do is ignore murders like that of 7-year-old Jacelyn Adams in Chicago Sunday, sitting in the drive-thru at a McDonald's looking forward to a happy meal with her dad. Her life didn't matter because her life couldn't be used to fundraise. And that's the real reason complying with police officers and resisting arrest isn't the message from Democrats, the media, and so-called community leaders. You can't rake in the cash without the outrage. Well, yes, it's exactly to the point. Occasionally in the inner city, you have people wailing about the carnage all around them as if this carnage has fallen from heaven instead of being perpetrated by their friends, neighbors, and relatives. And typically, when the police come around, they get no cooperation, even though many, many, many people know who's responsible for these acts. And I'm afraid I've been placed into the unfortunate position of if they don't care about their lives, why should I? From the Daily Mail, Donald Trump brands LeBron James racist. Donald Trump has called LeBron James racist for his tweet in response to the police killing of a 16-year-old Iowa teenager, which the former president described as divisive, nasty, insulting, and demeaning. Trump, who has frequently clashed with the Obama-supporting sports star, weighed in with a scathing statement on Thursday evening. James, 36, tweeted on Wednesday a photo of Nicholas Reardon, the Columbus police officer who shot and killed Ma'Khia Bryant in the city on Tuesday. James captioned the image of the officer, "You're next, #accountability." His tweet was an echo of his response the day before to the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. When Chauvin was found guilty of murdering Floyd, James tweeted accountability. The sporting superstar, however, deleted his tweet about Bryant's death soon after. Yes, and then, why is everyone talking about me? Amusing piece at revolver.news. Past video where LeBron James discusses white people explains a lot about his racial actions today. And it begins by talking about the famous Mean Joe Green Coke ad from 1979. Yes, those days are past. Today's so-called sports heroes like LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick are a completely different breed. They represent whiny, spoiled, effeminate men who lack manly virtue and have boulder-sized chips on their shoulder. Insofar as LeBron is concerned, the chip he carries around has a very childlike victim quality to it, which is curious coming from such a powerful billionaire. But those deep crevices within the human psyche don't care much about basketball games and piles of money, do they? Perhaps within the dark corners of LeBron's mind, he anguishes over his father who abandoned him. Perhaps he projects feelings of anger and insecurity back onto a society that he feels has let him down. That could be one reason why LeBron lashes out the way he does, but there's more than just that. Look at what happened Wednesday when he sent a threatening tweet about the hardworking middle-class police officer who saved a young black girl from being stabbed by a crazed, knife-wielding teenager in Ohio. After deleting the tweet, LeBron waited about 2 hours before issuing a rambling and selfish statement that painted himself as the victim and was completely devoid of truth and facts. I'm so damn tired of seeing black people killed by police. I took the tweet down because it's being used to create more hate. This isn't about one officer. Then why did you single one out, LeBron? It's about the entire system, and they always use our words to create more racism. See, blacks have no agency. They have no agency. I'm so desperate for more accountability, he concludes, but not from himself. Revolver concludes, this type of statement shouldn't surprise anyone. LeBron has a history of playing the victim and passively whining. NBA fans know that LeBron is a crybaby and have called him out for it repeatedly over the years. Michael Jordan and Larry Bird were the epitome of manly, cool guys who, win or lose, always took responsibility on and off the court by being good role models. On the flip side, LeBron shirks responsibility on the court when his team loses, and he refuses to take the blame for just about anything. LeBron, who humbly calls himself King James, has transformed from a first-string superstar into a second-string flunky activist. He has a disgraceful history of inciting race mobs and having zero gravitas as a public figure when commenting on current events or anything remotely related to civil rights. And speaking of history, LeBron also has a long history of hating white people. It's true. As he describes it, he disliked white folks because he was both envious and fearful of them. LeBron was filled with racism and hate at a very young age, brought on by his environment, circumstances, community, and other influences. And attached is a video wherein LeBron describes being sent to an all-white school when he was younger, and pay attention to his tone. Yes, and he found out what a pantry was. I suppose white people had kept that word from him in order to trigger or humiliate him. Revolver comments, is it just me, or can you still hear the contempt? Clearly, LeBron is a man filled with deep insecurities. Why else would you call yourself king and have to tell the world how smart and informed you are? Quote, I speak from a very educated mind. I'm kind of the wrong guy to go at because I do my homework. That's right. LeBron claims that he's extremely smart and uneducated, unlike his critics. I mean, that may be true, but it's a hard pill to swallow when you watch him bungle his way through a simple question about a Malcolm X book he was supposedly reading. But you can't really blame King James for thinking he's the smartest man in the room when he has sports writers all over the globe blowing huge amounts of smoke up his rear end on a daily basis. And speaking of books, are you familiar with the internet phenomenon surrounding LeBron James and his big brain books? Many people are convinced that he only reads the first page of these books, and they have the photos to back up their claims. Yes, many pictures of LeBron James reading a book, and he's always on page 1. People also find it curious how LeBron can walk at a brisk pace while looking down reading a book. Must be that photographic memory of his. That first page theory is funny, but actually there's some truth to it, says Revolver. I believe LeBron James is the type of pompous narcissist who thinks he only needs to read the first page of anything in order to qualify as an expert on the subject. Yes, and I'll point out once again that LeBron James is hideously ugly. He looks like a monster. But it seems that the advertising industry considers that a benefit and not a cost. Oh, more about Makia Bryant. It's from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News, and forgive the profanity, but it doesn't really come through clearly without it. New footage shows Makia Bryant yelling, "I'm going to stab the fuck out of you, bitch," during knife attack. This again vindicates the officer's response. Leftists have continually lied about the incident in Columbus, Ohio, at first claiming Bryant was unarmed, and then trying to argue that she was just a child who got involved in a knife fight and should have been left alone. In reality, the new footage once again underscores what really happened. Bryant was engaged in a frenzied knife attack, and shooting her dead, the officer saved the lives of 2 other African-American women. Yes, incredibly, there was a huge surge of comment on Twitter in the last few days saying, hey, it's just teenage hijinks between girls, and the man doesn't need to stick his nose where it don't belong. Well, if this is typical teenage hijinks between black teenage girls, well, the message is clear. Avoid black teenage girls at all costs. I don't know why these people think that they are helping their own people or their allies by saying that attempting, being this close from slashing someone's throat or plunging a butcher knife through someone's belly is just typical black girl hijinks. That does not help. That does not help. From the Mail, Ma'Khia Bryant's military vet neighbor says his security camera footage proves Columbus cop had no choice but to shoot her. Second neighbor says knife-wielding 16-year-old was in full attack mode and the other girl's life was at stake. And we're talking about a brave man here, a vet called Donovan Brinson. And I really must salute his courage. As for the media, well, what can we say? Andy Ngo says in his book that he was offended when Donald Trump said that the media was the enemy of the people. I'm not really in the media anymore, but I used to be, and I will have to admit that it's a fair cop, Gov. This is from Zero Hedge. NBC News, which was forced to apologize in 2012 for deceptively editing the 911 phone call of George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin case to make him sound racist, has done it again. Following the fatal officer-involved shooting of Ma'Khia Bryant, who was about to stab another girl in Columbus, Ohio, tensions flared as a flood of leftist journalists and blue checks on Twitter falsely reported that Bryant was unarmed. Later that day, body cam footage revealed that Bryant was clearly wielding a knife and about to stab the other black teen when she was shot. NBC News, however, continued peddling the unarmed lie with a deceptive edit of the 911 call to remove a reference to the attempted stabbing, as well as the video, which NBC stops right before it's apparent the teen is holding a knife. How about that? Matthew Peterson tweeted, "Call me batshit crazy, but let me gently suggest that circulating a couple of edited and incendiary Rorschach test-style video clips of a few random incidents every summer in a nation of 330 million people may not be the best basis for sound public policy and social commentary." What can I say? But indeed. And of course, Ma'Khia Bryant, she was intersectional. And how was she intersectional? Well, I'll let you know. And this is from Andy Ngo's Twitter feed. A communist writer says that Ma'Khia Bryant being fat made her suffer more oppression that led to her getting killed during the knife attack. And this is from Fat Fairy Princess. Fairy is spelled Faerie. I don't know, like William Yeats style. And this is very big amongst the neo-pronoun people. I'm not really sure what fairy spelled that way means. At Melanin Barbie, Ma'Khia Bryant being fat matters, she thunders. The violence that young fat black girls experience contributed to her death. And if you don't understand why, y'all need to start cracking open some fucking books on fat phobia. Okay? Every single tweet that is being fat phobic is being reported and you will be blocked. I'm not playing with y'all. She describes herself as fat abolitionist photographer and writer, and editor commissions open. They, she. Yeah, okay. You know, I know that there are a lot of insane people on Twitter, and a lot of people like to write off their opinions as being meaningless. But given that increasingly newspaper articles are merely a concatenation of tweets on any particular subject, I don't think that Twitter can be written off in that way with regard to its influence. Ryan Landry, whose book I commended a few months ago on the book club. Writes today at the American Sun, which he edits, the left pounced on the Columbus shooting immediately. One problem, body cams. There was clear-cut footage of the event which showed very clearly how split-second decisions are made. He saved a life but took a life. People see it and can understand. This saved Columbus from arson, and it saved that cop and police department the fate of Chauvin and Minneapolis. Expect body cams to be removed from cops. Now that they were just requested, no, demanded to be added to police officers for accountability after the 15 to 16 season of Black Lives Matter. Why remove them? Because for millions of interactions, cops are annoying but have trouble-free touches with people. Body cams no show reality. Reality means the hands up, don't shoot lie would have been snuffed out quickly. That is exactly why the Columbus mayor and police department did full disclosure on day one to defuse the situation. This is why body cams will be removed. With that technology, the finessing of the moment is tougher. Who needs eyewitness lies when there is eyewitness without a bias, watching everything from the cop's chest? This happens with traffic stops too, where dash cams turn on automatically and keep rolling and recording. Body cams will disappear. In the long run, we will get cameras everywhere and robot patrols, but no real safety. People will cocoon. Human cops might exist still as a job program. After the last 12 months of mayhem with stand-down orders while also harassing maskless grandmothers and churchgoers, does anyone care about their fate? Remember, Minneapolis didn't release the body cam footage until months later, and to few people in person, which changed the narrative a bit as Floyd was yelling about breathing while standing or sitting up untouched. But by then, though, millions had protested and the woke congregations had their services in the streets. You think Ryan Landry is exaggerating? Well, I don't know whether you've heard about this. But in the last few months, the Washington Post and the New York Times, several of the most prominent classical music writers in America have demanded that symphony orchestras give up their recent tradition of blind auditions. Blind auditions came around a couple of decades ago because female musicians complained that they were not being hired by orchestras because of their sex. And so people who audition for symphony orchestras now play behind a screen so that their sex or presumably their race or ethnicity cannot be determined. What the Washington Post and the New York Times is telling us now is that blind auditions must be removed because there are not enough black musicians in symphony orchestras. But nobody knows whether they're black. Well, that's the point. If the symphony orchestras knew that they were black, then they would feel pressure to hire them. But the symphony orchestras, these are blind auditions, and they say, well, we're only going to hire the best. Well, hiring the best is racist. It's an example of white supremacy. These black musicians, or some of them, are plenty good enough. And here we see that the good is the enemy of the best. Now, of course, as far as diversity goes, these blind auditions have led to significantly more diversity in symphony orchestras. But I suppose, unfortunately for the woke crowd, the beneficiaries of this diversity are mostly Asian women. And, insurrection. We heard this word insurrection a lot about what happened on January 6th at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. We don't hear it about Portland for some reason. And here's a story from the Citizen Free Press today. Breaking: BLM stormed the Oklahoma Capitol building yesterday during House session over GOP bill protecting drivers fleeing riots, police from doxing. Demonstrators chanting Black Lives Matter stormed the Oklahoma Capitol on Wednesday, forcing the State House of Representatives into lockdown in order to protest several Republican-backed bills. More than 24 protesters filled the gallery on the 5th floor while the Oklahoma House in the chamber below was in session. Video showed demonstrators chanting, "Stand united against all hate, and we will use our voices to stand against corruption, to fight hate, to defend Black and brown lives." Let's go back to the chat. Jogokin666 says family of 8 beat women and husband and killed their cat after their brat assaulted the cat. Police refused to help. Brooklyn, New York. Cecil Henry says, where are the arrests for the journalists who even tried to dox the jurors and intimidate them? No, that's just information. The more you know, right? If the media does it, it's a good thing. Except, if it's, Fox News or whatever. Chogokin666 says, cat was internet famous and on a leash, so cops and YKW deserve each other. Oh, MF Superstar says people should opt out of any jury duty when system signaling that intersectionalism is in effect. Well, there's an easy way to get out of jury duty. It's really easy. You don't have to say, I don't want to serve on a jury. They ask you some questions, and you can either go totally overboard, saying that, yeah, well, come on. You got to convict. There's a cop involved and a black man. Or you can go the other direction, indicating, oh, you're perhaps less than fond feelings of racial minorities, either of which will get you swiftly kicked off the jury. It's not hard. Yo Mama says KMG should have a section called Dispatches from Dystopia. Yes, Brandon Smith agrees. Getting out of jury duty is easy. When you do it, it's insurrection, says MF Superstar. When I do it, it's social justice. Buddy says, Kevin, will you be getting Canadian Gibbs in arrears? That remains to be seen. I'll let you know when it happens, or if it happens. Cecil Henry says there was black on white juror intimidation in the deliberations. It's atrocious. Gerard Depardieu says apparently the jurors were even afraid to talk to each other, referred to each other by number, not name. Again, Cecil Henry again, forgive me, but I'm reading these from bottom up. The fact that we have jurors admitting public and even before the trial ended that they were afraid of being attacked if they vote wrong means justice is done in America, and the MSN is fine with it. Hello to Professor Paul. Steve says, fat, angry black women blaming white people for being fat and angry. Chogokin666 says, I want to know who the grown man who kicks the girl in the head and his relation to the stabber. Yes, there was very little media attention in this, but I guess people recognize the one drop of blood in the water rule that obtains in communities like that. Okay, let's move on to a different subject here, a lighter subject, and it's from Slate, and they have an advice column. And what is the advice column? It's called Ask Prudy. Yeah, so very old-fashioned, eh? And it's written by someone called Danny M. Lavery. And I'd heard of this person. I use the word person advisedly. According to Wiki, Daniel M. Lavery, born Mallory Ortberg, November 28, 1986, is an American author and editor. Okay, Mallory. That's a woman's name, wouldn't it be? So I'm assuming this is a female to male transsexual. I'm looking at this picture. This person has made itself look truly non-sexual, truly so. So this person is married to someone called Grace Lavery, an associate professor of English at UC Berkeley, and the most followed transgendered scholar in the world on social media. How about that? And I took a look of the official picture of Grace Lavery from Berkeley English last night, and no joke, I burst out laughing. Well, as they say, misery loves company. So here's the question. Dating Mr. Almost Always Right. I'm in a 3-year relationship with a wonderful, caring, and considerate man. He is truly the love of my life, and we are a great team. The issue arises in that when he gives me advice or provides feedback on a situation, he is usually, almost without fail, correct about how the situation will play out. He can predict the behavior of other people with uncanny accuracy, outline what he believes the outcome of a situation will be, and it unfolds like he is psychic. We have had a couple of instances now in our relationship where if I had only listened to him, I would have avoided serious issues in my interactions with others and saved myself a lot of trouble. There are other instances where, against his own judgment on the matter, my boyfriend took my advice and ended up with a bad outcome he would have otherwise avoided. And when I do listen to his advice, the outcome is usually very favorable for me. He is decent enough not to rub it in my face when he was right and I was wrong, nor is he smug and self-congratulatory, but his level of correctness has peaked to a point that it fills me with profound resentment. When I express disappointment or frustration with my failed decisions, he says things like, I'm always here to talk things through with you before you make a decision if you want feedback, or I wish you would have talked to me before you did that and I could have helped you. And it doesn't feel like support. It makes me want to scream. I'm starting to feel incompetent and like I can't make a good decision. I'm a PhD who owns her own home and pays her own bills, so I can't be all that incompetent. I would fail without commentary or just get empathy rather than an offer to save me from myself in the future. Am I totally overreacting to this? Is this gaslighting at an expert level? This is in such stark contrast to every other part of our relationship, and I have a sneaking suspicion that this might be an issue about my personal baggage and how it feels for me to be wrong. Ironically, the situation I'm writing about has compromised my own confidence to decide about this situation. This woman here must be, as Martin Amis would say, brill in the bag, because she sounds like an absolute nightmare. I have a pretty good idea what she's talking about. I've run into situations like this with women, and often they will decide that this is an issue of judgment. Whatever the situation is, this is about doing the right thing. Well, yeah, except that no one's going to care about the issue of justice here. Okay, I'll give you an example. Walking across the street, even in a crosswalk, even in a green light, and being very careful and, not taking any chances with cars. Many times women have said to me, we have the right of way. It's a crosswalk, or it's a green light. And my response has been, yeah, okay, when you're a quadriplegic in your wheelchair, I suppose you can gloat about your $10 million settlement then. I sure showed him. But no, it's true enough as a general rule that when women, well, not all women, ask you for advice about a problem, they're not asking for advice. They are simply letting you know, warming you up for just, they want to express their feelings about it. Men, for all their faults, are problem solvers. I'll give you another example. This is the sort of thing that comes up all the time in offices. A woman is mad at other woman. She never refills the paper in the copier or the toner when it runs out, or makes a new pot of coffee when it's empty, or cleans the microwave when she has befouled it. So what do? Okay, well, you have two choices. You could learn to live with it, or you could make an issue of it with this woman. Choices are pretty stark there, but this is seen as, mansplaining. That, oh, yes, you've just tied this up in a neat little bow. Well, yeah, I have, but come on, you must have considered this yourself. Surely you must have considered it yourself. This woman, okay, we'll call her Jennifer. Okay, she's a jerk, okay? Sure, I'm with you on that, okay? But where are you going to go beyond that? Are you going to seethe with passive aggression until, maybe this gets to be serious, that you end up lashing out disproportionately one day, perhaps, in front of other people, perhaps in front of your boss, and getting into trouble at work? But Daniel M. Lavery counseled the woman that you don't have to ask him for advice, which is very true. And on the subject of women posting their L's, the never-ending soap opera of so-called sexual harassment in the Canadian military, Amanda Connolly reports Global News. Major Kelly Brennan tells MPs General Vance said he was untouchable and fathered 2 of her kids. This woman, who rose to the rank of major in the Canadian Forces, not the Canadian Armed Forces, because that would be triggering. They're officially called the Canadian Forces. She admits that she had a years-long affair with a married general, but she's the victim. She got promoted, you know. Apparently, she had no choice in the matter. Global News reached out to General Vance in February about the allegations. When asked if he was the father of one specific child by name, Vance said, "I am not." When asked when he was the father of another specific child by name, he said, "I don't even know who these people are." Yeah. On a personal note, he fathered 2 children with me. He's not responsible to pay or to have those children under his responsibility. It's all up to me, Brennan said. Brennan is lying. Pretty much just making the claim that he's the father means that he has to pay, and pay for decades. She is lying. And, oh, yes, this word consensual comes up. And she says, oh, yes, it was consensual. But, you know, because of the differences in power, the hierarchy or whatever, on a personal level, consensual means, was I participating in it? Yes. Could I say no to him? No. The reason why I say that is because if he rang me on the phone or if he texted me, I was obliged to get back to him. Yeah, okay. This woman had an affair with a married man and now claims that she fathered 2 of his children, and she's determined to scream this to the heavens. Yeah, okay, she made some bad choices. But of course, that's not her fault. It's everyone else's fault. So, trapped on the island. This is from Adam Chan at CTV News. On Friday, British Columbia announces plans to restrict travel within the province in an effort to curb the spread of COVID-19. Shortly after, BC Ferries outlined its role as a transportation provider among the new health restrictions. From April 23rd to May 25th, BC Ferries will prohibit travelers from riding ferries that cross health authority boundaries for non-essential reasons. The company says staff will ask all customers if their travel is essential before purchasing a ticket. Okay. Non-essential. Well, let's see. Let's see if there's a definition of what essential means. Okay, essential. There's 10 usages of this word in the story. Non-essential, I don't know, something to do with business, healthcare, childcare. Oh, I don't understand childcare. No, you're crossing to the mainland or vice versa for childcare. What if my old mother is, I think, she hasn't been very well lately, and I want to see her perhaps for the first time before she dies. Would that be considered non-essential? I suspect that it would be. But who are they to decide what is non-essential travel? Well, they can do it. They have the power. And that's what it comes down to. This is an amusing story from the CBC. Thursday's front page of the province's most popular daily newspaper, the Journal de Montréal, was denounced by all parties of the National Assembly, who said it stigmatized Quebec's Indian community. The premier also weighed in, although his comments were less forceful than those by opposition party members and one of his own ministers. The Journal de Montréal featured a photo on its cover of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau from his 2018 trip to India. He is wearing a traditional Indian outfit, which he did, and holding his hands together like this, which he did, wearing that getup. The headline reads in French, "The Indian variant is here." with a line below that appears to question Trudeau's reluctance to stop incoming fights from India. Oh dear, dear, shocking, just absolutely shocking. I thought that these Sikhs were supposed to be a tough bunch. And in the "It's Dr. So-and-so to you, buddy" file, this is from Yaron Steinbuch at the New York Post, a North Carolina city has reportedly ousted a white official who refused a black resident's request to be addressed by her doctoral title during a televised meeting. Tony Collins, a member of the Greensboro Zoning Commission, was removed by the city council this week after a tense exchange involving Carrie Rosario, an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, the Charlotte Observer reported. It was a very disrespectful exchange between an important commissioner and a public citizen, said City Councilwoman Sharon Hightower, who called for the vote to remove Collins. That should never happen, she said. During the exchange, Collins referred to her as Mrs. Rosario. "It's Dr. Rosario, thank you, sir," she replied. "If Mrs. Rosario has something..." "Dr. Rosario? Well, I'm sorry, your name says on here Carrie Rosario." "Hey, Carrie," Collins persisted, "it's Dr. Rosario. I wouldn't call you Tony, so please, sir, call me as I would like to be called." "It doesn't really matter," Collins replies. "It matters to me. And out of respect, I would like you to call me by the name that I'm asking you to call me by. Your screen says Carrie Rosario. I'm verbalizing my name is Dr. Carrie Rosario. And it really speaks very negatively as a commissioner to be disrespectful." Hightower later told her colleagues that Collins was using his white privilege by refusing Rosario's request. "It's not going to be tolerated. As a black female, I'm not going to see another black female treated in this matter." Yeah. What's your PhD in? Health education. Yeah, health education. Pretty valuable PhD there. And at Lockdown Skeptics, the latest there. Members of the European Parliament served with notices of liability ahead of vaccine passport vote. They've been told they may be held liable for harm and death caused by the introduction of a COVID certification scheme. Doctors for COVID Ethics, a group of doctors, scientists, and lawyers from around the world, has served MEPs with notices of liability, advising them that they may be held personally liable should they vote for the implementation of a digital green certificate in the European Parliament next Wednesday. No jab, no job. Can healthcare staff be coerced into getting vaccinated? Well, we'll see. EU orders 1.8 billion doses of Pfizer's COVID vaccine. The EU will soon seal its departure from the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine by signing off on the world's biggest vaccine deal yet. 1.8 billion doses of the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine to last until 2023. Wales will be reopening ahead of schedule based on data, not dates. But Boris is still hiding under his desk, according to this cartoon here, even as infections, hospitalizations, and deaths have plummeted and continue to do so. Over 20,000 children have disappeared from school rolls, having fallen off the school roll over the past year, largely due to health concerns related to COVID. Official COVID pandemic over in Britain. With the ONS reporting today that the number of people infected with COVID-19 in England has fallen to its lowest level since September. Researchers at Oxford have said the vaccines are so effective that the UK is no longer in the midst of a pandemic. Students appeal to Competition and Markets Authority over tuition fees. Yes, they paid for a university education and they are not getting one. But it is being demanded, of course, that they pay the same amount of money. 12-year-olds to be given COVID vaccines from September, despite the fact that COVID is not a threat to them. The vaccine may be, however. Genevieve Campbell, who I quoted yesterday, tweeted, Dr. Fauci was asked why Texas, with no statewide restrictions, hasn't yet seen a surge this spring, unlike other states. His answer, it's not the mandates that matter, it's behavior. And Texans are simply behaving better than people in Michigan. Just watch. It's astounding. But I thought those people in Texas were all a bunch of ignorant rednecks who couldn't follow an order, if you shouted it in their ears repeatedly and stamped on their feet while you were shouting at them. Apparently it's the people in Michigan who don't know how to do as told. It's too funny. This comes down, we keep hearing this again and again. You have to stop doing that. You have to stop acting irresponsibly. You see, when you act irresponsibly, the virus knows. The virus can recognize the weak, the scofflaws, and it heads straight for them. Going to Alex Berenson, if VAERS, that is the outfit that keeps track of virus reactions, is to be believed, blood clots may not be the only problems with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Relative to the number of shots given, reports for overall deaths, life-threatening and serious events in people under 50 are coming in much faster for the Johnson & Johnson than for the mRNAs. About 3.8 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been given to people under 50, and VAERS has 97 reports of deaths and life-threatening injuries that follow the shot. Many are quite striking, like the 38-year-old who died at a friend's house 4 hours after his shot. 97 out of 3.8 may seem small, but these are mostly healthy people. VAERS is backlogged. Side effects are badly underreported, even when serious. Yes, it's self-reporting as well. What if I'm just spitballing here? Work with me. The vaccines are more dangerous to people under 40 because they produce an overly vigorous immune response, say. And what if not enough of those folks were in the trials to catch serious and even moderately frequent side effects? Berenson continues, because the safety picture is all about the pivotal trials. The preclinical work was rushed, to be generous, and the dose-ranging work even more. But what if the trials weren't big enough? They didn't have enough old people, but maybe they didn't have enough young ones either. Meanwhile, back on the mRNA front, the Israelis are getting worried about heart infections after the Pfizer vaccination. Okay. And moving on, I'll talk about the Sackler family next week. I want to talk about a piece in the New York Times by one of America's leading conservatives, perhaps the doyen of American conservatism, and his name is David Brooks. And it's called The GOP is Getting Worse. Trumpians are having a venomous panic attack. Oh, it's the Trumpians that are having a venomous panic attack. Is it? Well, I just want to tell you how he introduced this story on his own Twitter feed. And I could scarcely believe it. The left found ways to restrain its fanatics. The right never did. So leftist leadership said, it's gay marriage. It's a step too far. You've got civil partnerships. Why don't you just leave it at that? Why are you messing around with the institution of marriage? Is that what they said? How about trans rights? How about pushing it to the limit of if you say you're a woman or a man, you are? That seems pretty fanatical to me. Did the left, again, instruct its troops? No, don't go there, okay? This is going to piss people off enormously. Or restrain its fanatics. Okay, something bad happens in a city, please don't burn it down. We're ordering you, don't burn it down, and especially don't loot. Is that the way that the left restrains its fanatics? I could give many, many other examples. Brooks begins, those of us who had hoped America would calm down when we no longer had Donald Trump spewing poison from the Oval Office have been sadly disabused. Yes, let's begin with some top grade concern trolling. There are increasing signs that the Trumpian base is radicalizing. My Republican friends, who are your Republican friends, David Brooks? The Lincoln Project? Report vicious divisions in their churches and families. Republican politicians who don't toe the Trump line are speaking of death threats and menacing verbal attacks. Oh, menacing verbal attacks. Yeah, I can imagine what those are. It's as if the Trump base felt some security when their man was at the top, and now that's gone. Maybe Trump was the restraining force. How about the Biden people and the media and everyone else saying, Trump is gone now and you are all going to get it in the neck? Yeah, you were getting it in the neck when he was president, but now, yeah. What's happening can only be called a venomous panic attack. Since the election, large swaths of the Trumpian right have decided America is facing a crisis like never before, and they are their small army of warriors fighting with Alamo-level desperation to ensure the survival of the country as they conceive it. Yeah, how about when the new president of the United States opens the border? Oh, and by the way, criminal convictions, now we're going to suppress that information, okay? Oh, y'all have to provide ID to get on planes, but illegal immigrants from Mexico and elsewhere won't have to. And you're not allowed to call them illegal immigrants anymore by law. The first important survey data to understand, Brooks says, this moment is the one pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson discussed with my colleague Ezra Klein when asked in late January if politics is more about enacting good public policy or ensuring the survival of the country as we know it. 51% of Trump Republicans said survival, only 19% said policy. Ensuring the survival of the country, know it. Yeah, this is obviously more important. Okay, that is the most important thing for any leaders. But that means absolutely nothing to David Brooks. I don't know if America had a Mau government. Well, they still have the Constitution. If Martians took over and pledged to, abide by the Constitution, that would be just fine with David Brooks. Once again, never call yourself a conservative, because if you do, you will have people like David Brooks and David French telling you, you can't do this, you can't say this, you can't think this, because that is not the conservative way. Saying that you're conservative means that you are letting your enemies tell you what you can and cannot do. According to Brooks, the level of Republican pessimism is off the charts. A February Economist YouGov poll asked Americans which statement is closest to their view. It's a big, beautiful world, mostly full of good people, and we must find a way to embrace each other and not allow ourselves to become isolated. Or our lives are threatened by terrorists, criminals, and illegal immigrants, and our priority should be to protect ourselves. Over 75% of Biden voters chose a big, beautiful world. 2/3 of Trump voters chose our lives are threatened. This level of catastrophism, nearly despair, has fed into an amped up warrior mentality. The decent know that they must become ruthless. They must become the stuff of nightmares, Jack Kerwick writes in the Trumpian magazine American Greatness. The good man must spare not a moment to train in both body and mind to become the monster that he may need to become in order to slay the monsters that prey upon the vulnerable. With this view, the January 6th insurrection, now it's an insurrection again, was not a shocking descent into lawlessness, but a practice for the war ahead. A week after the siege, nearly a quarter of Republicans polled said violence can be acceptable to achieve political goals. Yeah, and what would Democrats say? Because Democrats have been propping up BLM and Antifa for years now, and they're violent organizations. And Maxine Waters. We need more confrontation, in an attempt to terrify a jury. And the Democrats voted against a censure motion. William Salatin of Slate recently rounded up the evidence showing how many Republican politicians are now cheering the January 6th crowd, voting against resolutions condemning them. Liberal democracy, Brooks instructs us, is based on a level of optimism, faith, and a sense of security. It's based on confidence in the humanistic project, that through conversation and encounter, we can deeply know each other across differences, that most people are seeking the good with different opinions about how to get there, that society is not a zero-sum war, but a conversation and a negotiation. As Leon Wieseltier writes in the magazine Liberties, James Madison was an optimist and a pessimist at the same time, a realist and an idealist. Philosophic liberals, whether on the right side of the political spectrum or the left, understand people have selfish interests, but believe in democracy and open conversation because they have confidence in the capacities of people to define their own lives, to care for people unlike themselves, to keep society progressing. Here we go. David A. French says the same thing, and many other so-called conservatives. Oh, they're liberals. Yeah, we're classical liberals, okay? You know, for decades we said we're conservatives. Actually, we're classical liberals. Classical liberalism, Manchester liberalism, has led us to the crisis that we are in today. Another reason not to be a conservative, what exactly are you conserving? Oh, so I see the people on the left, they believe in democracy and open conversation because they have the confidence that blah, blah, blah. No, they don't. What they are saying is, you agree with us or you are a fascist and we will destroy you by any means necessary. So the question is David Brooks stupid, or is he just obtuse, or is he willingly lying to us? He continues, with their deep pessimism, the hyper-populist wing of the GOP seems to be crashing through the floor of philosophical liberalism into an abyss of authoritarian impulsiveness. Many of these people are no longer even operating in the political realm. The GOP response to the Biden agenda has been anemic because the base doesn't care about mere legislation, just their own cultural standing. Yes, what is one's own cultural standing compared to mere legislation? Over the last decade or so, as illiberalism, cancel culture, and all the rest have arisen within the universities and elite institutions on the left, dozens of publications of organizations have sprung up. They have drawn a sharp line between progressives who believe in liberal free speech norms and those who don't. There are new and transformed magazines and movements like American Purpose, Persuasion, Counterweight, Our Digital Tablet, and Liberties that point out the excesses of the social justice movement and distinguish between those who think that speech is a mutual exploration to seek truth and those who think that speech is a structure of domination to perpetuate systems of privilege. Yes, I've come across many useful articles in Tablet. I don't know about the others. What is his point? Deranged people do not respond to reason, they respond only to fear. Does David Brooks not know this? So all of the finger wagging of these new and transformed magazines has persuaded the people on the left, BLM, Antifa, and the like, the trans movement, Drag Queen Story Hour. Yeah, you've just got, this is a step too far. You have to step back. Is that what's happened? Or have they just become emboldened by the spinelessness of their opponents? So David Brooks concludes, this is exactly the line drawing that now confronts the right, which faces a more radical threat. Republicans and conservatives who believe in the liberal project need to organize and draw a bright line between themselves and the illiberals on their own side. This is no longer just about Trump the man. It's about how you are going to look at reality as the muddle it's always been, or as an apocalyptic hellscape. It's about how you pursue change through the conversation and compromise of politics, or through intimidations of macho display. I can tell a story in which the Trumpians self-marginalize or exhaust themselves. Permanent catastrophism is hard, but apocalyptic pessimism has a tendency to deteriorate into nihilism, and people eventually turn to the strong man to salve the darkness and chaos inside themselves. Does David Brooks forget that for the 4 years that Trump was president, America was ruled by literal Nazis, by Hitler? This is what the left was saying. Has he forgotten that? Has he forgotten all the talk of la résistance? And by any means necessary? Has he forgotten all that? No. Oh, yes, they believe in the liberal project. You see, what Brooks is saying is conservatism can't exist because you're all liberals. And I'm going to tell you what level of resistance to civilizational collapse is allowed, and that level is finger pointing. No, David Brooks is not stupid, and he's not obtuse. He is wicked. Full stop. Let's see. William Hicks says, Kevin, that voice, it would be perfect for a metrosexual hotline. Call us if you need a real talking to. Real men cannot be that glib, says a Hikmah warrior. David Brooks, the chutzpah of that guy. Chutzpah of that guy. So he married a Christian woman, and he persuaded her, or insisted to her, that she convert to Judaism, which she did. And then he insisted or persuaded her that she needed to change her first name, which she did. And had I forgotten that David Brooks is a Canadian? Okay. That tells me a lot. So David Brooks is working on a book, and he falls for a research assistant, so he dumps his wife and then complains that she is being bothersome. Yeah, okay. And then he writes a book, which is published, 2 years later, called The Road to Character. You see what I mean about chutzpah? Frothing Fanboy says, I had a photo of David Brooks on my dartboard, but it got full of holes. I am not making this up. Hopper says, Taki also tells a story about Richard Spencer puking on his bathroom floor and then leaving without cleaning it up or even mentioning it. Anran says, Brooks was never a hard right guy, even by conservative ink standards. Didn't many of them consider a squish back during George the Lesser's 2 terms? Chogokin 666 says, conversation, we talk, you listen. Exactly. We need to have a conversation about race. I don't want to have a conversation about race with you because I'm going to say something which ends up with you screaming at me and me losing my job or, worse. That's not a conversation. A lecture followed by whatever you say I'm supposed to believe in, that's what I believe in. And if that changes, tomorrow, then I'll change. That's not my idea of a conversation. Brandon Smith says there's a big push on right now to be inclusive to the alphabet people and assurances of no sexual misconduct for other more attractive female types to insist them to enlist. Yeah, I see that Kevin Spacey's career is supposedly over, but, if the Me Too movement really wanted to get into, the down and dirty stuff in Hollywood, they would look at homosexual predation and lesbian predation in both movies and television. But nah, they don't want to get into that. They do not want to get into that. Herbert Marcuse is mentioned briefly in Andy Ngo's book. I don't think he gets as much attention as he perhaps should. Okay, this is from Life After DSA, DSA meaning the Democratic Socialists of America. Editor's note, we got word that all members of the executive committee of DSA Cincy, presumably Cincinnati, are stepping down after defending a sexual abuser who they're in a polycule with. And the grievance officer assigned to the case was also in the polycule. We're not kidding. I was familiar with the term throuple, which means a threesome. Typically, 2 women, 1 man, 2 men, 1 woman, sometimes, 3 women, 3 men. But a polycule, I'm guessing, based on the poly, that what a polycule means is it's orgy town, baby. Life after DSA continues. National had to get involved. They defended and expelled sexual abuser. Everyone was in a huge polycule. Please have a good laugh or cry. Here we thought Philly DSA and Los Angeles DSA were the worst and weirdest. Ohio coming out of nowhere with flying colors. We won't weigh in on polycules because that's between you and your contacts list, but the committee accused survivors and other chapter members of, transphobia, all to defend a sex abuser. Some members they accused were also trans and non-binary. We're still not kidding. Can the people in the polycule please stop threatening us? We get that you outnumber us, but that's not a good thing. It seems like 4 executive council members were involved in the polycule, and the non-polycule HGOs assigned to this helped the survivor and helped with EC resignations. We can't tell you, but if you weren't a polycule member, we salute you. I reviewed Stephen Sukup's excellent book, The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, a couple of weeks ago. And here's something that he wrote therein. In 1959, Herbert Marcuse published Eros and Civilization and concluded, in essence, that the key to undermining bourgeois society and thereby ending man's false understanding of his reality is sexual liberation and perversion. And a well-known environmental activist called Stephen Lees took issue with me because of his response to this hilarious business in Cincinnati. And hang on a second, I will get that for you. This fellow, Stephen Lees, had written, if there was sexual abuse, then that's awful. I'm glad the victims got help, but I find it weird that half of the criticism seemed to be about polyamory. Polyamory isn't inherently bad. Abuse is bad. Mixing activism with sex isn't smart, but polyamory wasn't the problem, was it? No, polymorphous perversity is never the problem. Never, never, never the problem. I responded to him, something you want to tell us about yourself, Mr. Stephen Lees? Is there something you want to know? Yeah, and then he said, well, you're a climate denier, so I'm not going to have anything to do with you, but I noticed that he's still fighting back. Stephen Lees, back in, what year was this? This is from the Washington Post. Well, 2019. The hunger strike inside House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office to protest inaction on climate change wasn't going well Thursday. So welcome, an introduction to Stephen Lees. We're looking at an existential threat to human society, Stephen Lees said, before he too was led away by Pelosi's office, hands behind his back. We won't be able to stop the impacts in the next 10 years. Lees, 28, spoke of a downward climate spiral of melting ice, rising seas, monster wildfires, and land that can no longer support crops. In other words, a future of hunger, the way he felt Thursday, having not eaten since Sunday. Lee's mother made a pie that night, one of the last things he gobbled down. On Thursday morning, he awoke feeling lethargic, not wanting to get out of bed. Yes, I don't know whether Stephen Lees is involved in a polycule or in some form of polyamory. I don't know, but he was so quick to defend it that it raises suspicions, or at least it does to me. Let's see. Ricardo Williams says Joseph Cotto was tired of Kevin's British disapproval of these sexual eccentrics. The polyamorous are natural conservatives. Yes. Yes, indeed. It's just a different type of family, isn't it? And who are you to judge? What sort of family is acceptable? Uh no. It's just all. It's all too funny. It's all too funny. And I'm going to be moving on to the book club shortly. Richard Hanania writes on Substack, April the 21st, why is everything liberal? Apparently, one of the reasons that everything is liberal is that people who are not liberals they're willing to vote, but they're not willing to contribute money to their causes. It begins in a democracy. Every vote is supposed to be equal. If about half the country supports one side and half the country supports another, you may expect major institutions to either be equally divided or to try to stay politically neutral. This is not what we find. If it takes a position on the hot button social issues around which our politics revolve, then almost every major institution in America that is not explicitly conservative leans left. In a country where Republicans get around half the votes or something close to that in every election, why should this be the case? This post started as an investigation into woke capital, one of the most important developments in the last decade or so of American politics. Although big business pressuring politicians is not new, the NFL moved the Super Bowl from Arizona over Martin Luther King Day. The scope of the issues on which corporations feel the need to weigh in is certainly expanding, including alphabet people issues, abortion laws, voting rights, kneeling during the national anthem, and gun control. Asking why corporations are woke is like asking why Hispanics tend to have two arms or why the Houston Rockets have increased their number of three-point shots taken over the last few decades. All humans tend to have two arms, and all NBA teams shoot more three-pointers than in the past. So focusing on one subset of the population that has the same characteristics as all the others in the group misses the point. I think one reason woke capital is getting so much attention is because we expect businesses to be more right-leaning, and corporations throwing in with the party of more taxes and regulation strikes us as odd. We are to schools, nonprofits, mainline religions, etc., taking liberal positions and feel like business should be different, but business is just being assimilated into a larger trend. Corporations are woke, meaning left-wing on social issues relative to the general population, because institutions are woke. So the question becomes, why are institutions woke? Well, all votes count equally on election day. At all other times, some citizens matter a lot more than others. For example, let's say I vote Republican every 2 years, but otherwise go on with my life and rarely ever think about politics. You, on the other hand, not only vote Democrat, but give money to campaigns, write your congressman when major legislation comes up, wear pink hats, and march in the streets or write emails to institutions when you're outraged about something. Through the lens of ordinal utility, in which people simply rank what they want to happen, we are about equal. I prefer Republicans to Democrats, Hanania writes, in layman's terms, but you have the opposite preference. But when we think in terms of cardinal utility, in layman's terms, how bad people want something to happen, it's no contest. You are going to be much more influential than me. Most people are relatively indifferent to politics and see it as a small part of their lives. Yet a small percentage of the population takes it very seriously and makes it part of its identity. Those people will tend to punch above their weight in influence, and institutions will be more responsive to them. In an evenly divided country, if one side simply cares more, it's going to exert a disproportionate influence on all institutions and be more likely to see its preferences enacted in the time between elections when most people aren't paying much attention. In simple terms, the theory presented here says liberals win because they care about politics more. Is there any way we can verify this is the case? Here are two graphs that have been getting a lot of attention, and it's who is donating to whom. And more to Biden, more to Trump. Well, who's giving more to Biden in a big way? Teachers, doctors and physicians, engineers, non-software, lawyers, nurses, managers, state professionals. And there's a whole bunch of other groups, professors, and a lot of big bubbles there. When you're looking at who's donating more to Trump, the biggest bubble, and it's not that big, is business owners, and there's pilots, drivers, etc. So whose employees have donated to Biden versus Trump? And looking at the majority here, and it's everybody almost, with the two exceptions the New York Police Department, and the United States Marines. How about that? How about that? No, it's true enough. I mean, you often hear people on the right say, I just want to be left alone. Well, what's it Trotsky famously said about war? You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. Well, you may not be interested in politics or in these people, but they are very much interested in you, and they want to hurt you. And they are willing to work hard and give their money. They are willing to risk arrest, to risk physical injury to do so. So it seems to me the position that I just want to be left alone is no longer tenable. I mean, it's tenable if you simply accept that you are going to lose, and what you thought was a miserable state now is going to get much, much more miserable. They are not going to stop. Why would they stop? They keep winning and winning and winning. I'll give you an example. I've used this example before. But in 1999, the Canadian Alliance, which was the official opposition, people called it a right-wing party. It wasn't really. It was sort of a populist party. They forced a vote in the Canadian House of Commons on homosexual marriage. The media and most of the Liberal Party, this is preposterous, absolutely preposterous, such showboating. This is needlessly divisive. Gay marriage? What are you talking about? Who's in favor of gay marriage? This is more right-wing paranoia. 3 years later, an Ontario court ruled, based on an 1867 Privy Council of Britain ruling on polygamy, no less, that of course gay marriage was legal in Canada, and shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court confirmed that this was the case. They do not give up, our enemies. You say, well, that's never going to happen. Look at all the social changes over the last 50 or 60 years and how revolutionary they have been. And I don't know, people like David Brooks or David French or all manner of people have said, just give them this and they'll be satisfied. No, they will not be satisfied until there is mandatory homosexuality amongst school children. And I am not exaggerating that in the slightest. How can you say you wouldn't want to be with a person of the same gender if you've never tried it? I mean, this mandatory homosexuality is truly educational. And before I go to the book club to speak of Andy Ngo's book, let's have a look at the chat. Okay, it was a Republican town until the 80s and 90s. Which one was that? Engineers donating to Biden. They want to work with engineering grads who learned woke math, says Steve. Hickman Warrior says, yeah, woke architect fembots who built a pedestrian bridge that collapsed in Miami. Hickman Warrior says, from No Child Left Behind to No Child's Behind Left Alone. Steve says, Andy Ngo had to flee the country, by the way. Antifa now racially profiles all Asians as potential no. Yes, that's included in his book. It's some rally, Asians. Yeah, that's him because he was Asian. That happened several times. You don't always choose your enemies. Okay. Is Columbus generally full of shit libs, says Anran? College towns often are. Yes, okay. It used to be Republican. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. David A. French, of course, has cheered on Drag Queen Story Hour as a triumph of American liberty. Yes, he has. He has. That tells you, oh, yes, I'm only interested in the process. Yeah, well, people who are only interested in the process lose, and they lose repeatedly. Ogan's Iron says, KMG men of the right need to relearn that a responsible citizen has a duty to be involved in the life of the city. Okay, so the book that I am discussing today on the book club is This one. Can you see that? It's called, oh, where did that go? I'll bring it up again. Pressed on the wrong button there. Come on, load you. Nah. See what happens when I try to use visual aids? Okay, hang on just a second here. The book by Andy Ngo, who has a very long Wikipedia entry, is called Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy, which was published just this year. I'm reading from Wikipedia here, which, big surprise, has a very unfriendly bio of Andy Ngo, who was born circa 1986. He's an American conservative journalist and social media personality known for covering and video recording demonstrations. He is editor-at-large of the Post-Millennial, a Canadian conservative news website, a regular guest on Fox News, and has published columns in outlets such as the Wall Street Journal and The Spectator. Ngo's coverage of anti-fascist groups and Muslims has been controversial, and the accuracy and credibility of his reporting have been disputed. He has been widely accused of sharing misleading and selectively edited videos described as a provocateur and accused of having links with militant right-wing groups in Portland. Yes, Portland is well known to be a hotbed of militant right-wing groups. His parents fled in Vietnam in 1978 as Vietnamese boat people. Raised in a Buddhist family, Ngo converted to Christianity in high school. After a period of time as an evangelical Christian, he became disillusioned and took an interest in skepticism and subsequently became an atheist. I don't know how true any of this is. Strangely enough, he has been described, in the Washington Examiner? No, has been, as a conservative gay. But Wikipedia, which is obsessed with the subject of homosexuality, has nothing to say on this. Oh, well, down at the bottom, he is listed as a gay writer. Okay. I mean, he's Asian and he is homosexual. That's pretty intersectional. Is it not? According to Wikipedia, Ngo's credibility and objectivity as a journalist have been extensively criticized. He's been accused of using selectively edited videos, not like NBC, say, and sharing misleading and inaccurate information to paint Antifa activists as violent and to underplay the violence of the far right, with Columbia Journalism Review accordingly describing Ngo as a discredited provocateur. Some of Ngo's contentions about Antifa have been rated as false by fact checker PolitiFact. Yeah, okay. If PolitiFact told me that the sun rises in the east, I would be deeply suspicious. Philosopher Jason Stanley contended in an interview with the, wait for it, Southern Poverty Law Center that Ngo promotes a false equivalence between left and right-wing political violence in the United States. So, we are told over and over again that Antifa doesn't exist. It doesn't exist as an organization. It is, in fact, an idea, perhaps a glorious idea, but not an organization. Ngo demonstrates dozens of times, or perhaps hundreds of times in this book, that there are many organizations which describe themselves as Antifa, such as Rose City Antifa in Ngo's native city of Portland. In any event, this really doesn't matter, and I think, it's my own personal opinion, that Antifa could be rightfully compared to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda means the base. Now, the news media gave you the idea that Al-Qaeda was some sort of huge army in waiting in the caves with their weapons. That's not what Al-Qaeda was. Al-Qaeda was a clearinghouse for information, for strategy and tactics, for money and other forms of assistance. It was largely decentralized, as is Antifa. But these people all think the same way. They all learn the same tactics. They all act in the same way. And they all have the same enemies and friends. You know, reading this book, you know, I've read a lot about Portland in the last couple of years, but just the accumulation of detail on the complete collapse of order in that city was still shocking. Was just shocking that people get arrested. People get arrested for serious crimes. Yeah, let's see. On the 4th of July, the violence escalated to unprecedented levels. That day, around 8,000 people surrounded the building, throwing rocks and explosives. They disabled the security cameras around the building using hammers, spray paint, and paintballs. Several in the mob openly carried rifles and handguns. One of the men arrested at the riot was Antifa shooter Michael Reinl. He was carrying an illegal firearm and resisted arrest, requiring 3 Portland police officers to be subdued. However, he was only cited and released because he claimed to be injured. His criminal charges were later dropped by the Multnomah County District Attorney. Reinl went on to kill a Trump supporter the following month in downtown Portland. So, from May through August 2020, hundreds have been taken into custody by law enforcement in Portland. But the result was the same for almost everyone. The Multnomah County District Attorney dropped the charges, even the serious felonies. Asara Butler, the accused riot supplier who in June sped off in her car, hitting other vehicles, was originally charged with felony riot, felony failure to perform duties of driver to injured person, felony criminal mischief, felony fleeing, reckless driving, and reckless endangering. Every single charge was dropped. Likewise, an accused arsonist who allegedly admitted to roommates she was part of Antifa had all her charges dismissed. The dropping and dismissal of their felony charges were the norm, not the exception. In the United States, local criminal charges are pursued or not by the county's elected district attorney. They have complete discretion to act. Portland's left-wing political monoculture means that the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office has to make politically calculated prosecutions that are favorable to the city's vocal woke populace. Justice is not blind in Portland. Antifa and BLM rioters are let go almost as quickly as they can be processed through jail. From 2013 to 2020, Multnomah County elected and re-elected Rod Underhill to be its district attorney. Underhill is a liberal, and it was reflected in his office's soft approach to crime in the 7 years he was there. However, on August 1st, 2020, Underhill stepped down early from office. This opened the way for Mike Schmidt to take the reins as the city convulsed through months of riots. Schmidt, 39, ran and won in a landslide election as a progressive candidate who promised criminal justice reform. 2 weeks before he took office, Schmidt signaled his approach to riots in an interview with Willamette Week, saying, quote, "I think that when you look historically at this nation, it's during these protests when we've gotten some of the changes that we are proudest of in our nation's history. And sometimes it took some property damage. It took more than just peaceful protests to get the government's attention. I'm very mindful of that," unquote. 11 days into office, Schmidt announced an official policy regarding riot and protest cases in the county. Under his policy, the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office preemptively declines to prosecute charges of interfering with an officer, disorderly conduct, criminal trespass, escape from law enforcement, and harassment. Felony riot charges are also automatically dropped unless coupled with a charge not already included on the list. What this means is that Multnomah County essentially decriminalized all crimes short of assault, arson, and property destruction at riots. Those who try to stop police from making arrests, ignore their lawful orders, and escape, they face no legal consequences, even if arrested. Further, Schmidt's policy states that charges of resisting arrest and assaulting a public safety officer, quote, must be subjected to the highest level of scrutiny by the deputy district attorney reviewing the arrest, unquote. That is a softer way of saying assault on police is conditionally allowed, and rioters charged with misdemeanors or felonies, where there was only financial harm, would be offered conditional dismissal. The announcement exacerbated the riots. Antifa already had practically free rein before, but now is official policy. On September 11, 2020, BLM Antifa rioters gathered outside Mayor Wheeler's condo for a second time. As much as Wheeler tried to kowtow to protesters for months, it was never enough. They demanded he resign. That night, they threw explosive fireworks at his building, which houses dozens of other family units. By around 11 p.m., rioters smashed their way into the ground level of a large occupied apartment building. They started a fire inside and stole furniture to start another fire on the street. A riot was declared and police made 19 arrests. All arrestees were released from jail within a few hours or bailed out. In response to the targeted violence, Mayor Wheeler announced he was moving. Well, what can I say about that? Well, that law and order has collapsed in Portland. Also, the media doesn't report on this. I have to go to Andy Ngo or Dennis Dale or maybe Breitbart to get news of this because the media is not interested. And as I was saying a couple of days ago on this live stream, expect more of this. The playbook that you see in Michel Houellebecq's novel, Submission. You can't complain about something that you don't know about. And in that novel, there is a burgeoning Muslim takeover of France. And so all of the criminal outrages by Muslims, the media simply stops reporting at the behest of the government. And in fact, when there is a Muslim coup d'etat in France, the government orders the media shut down completely. Newspapers, the internet, radio, TV, all shut down. And I think we're going to see more and more of this in America. And people like Andy Ngo, he's already been described as a provocateur. There will be efforts to have him, well, just to unperson him so that he cannot, his reporting cannot be heard. See, he's not a real reporter because he doesn't report for, I don't know, the Washington Post or the New York Times or Willamette Week, you know? Who's responsible for this? Now, you know, I'm not going to level any specific accusations, but we know for a fact that George Soros, the multi-billionaire Bond villain, has made substantial donations to help the election of deranged district attorneys. If the sort of thing that was happening in Portland and other cities, Seattle, and I'll get to Seattle in a moment, if this happened during the Cold War, I would have suspected that the Soviet Union was funding it, but the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. Could there be another still communist country looking to destabilize America, to weaken it, to soften it up for infiltration? Yeah, I think there's a high likelihood of that. Andy Ngo begins his book with a description of the ordeal that he suffered himself when he was attacked by, well, Antifa. Oh, let's see. Before I made it much farther, someone or something hit me hard in the back of the head. I was nearly knocked to the ground from the impact, never having been in a fight. I naively asked myself in the moment, did someone just trip and fall into me? Before I could turn around to look, a sea of bodies dressed in black surrounded me. In the background, I could still hear the crowd chant, "No hate." Ironically, all I saw next and felt was the pure embodiment of hatred. Staring at an amorphous mob of faceless shadows, I froze. Suddenly, clenched fists repeatedly struck my face and head from all directions. My right knee buckled from the impact. The masked attackers wore tactical gloves hardened with fiberglass on the knuckles. It's likely some of them used brass knuckles as well. I put my arms up to surrender, but this only signaled to them to beat me more ferociously. Someone then snatched my camera, my evidence. I desperately tried, but failed to hold on to it. The masked thief melted into the crowd, a function of the black bloc. Another person ran up and kicked me twice in the groin. Someone bashed me on the head from behind with a stiff placard or sign. The attack left me dazed and bloodied. I was bleeding from my ear and had open gashes all over my face. My eyes were beginning to swell with blood. I thought the beating was over, but next came the hailstorm of so-called milkshakes, eggs, and other hard objects in my face and head. The mob roared in laughter as I stumbled away. A crowd of cameramen surrounded and followed me. I thought they were going to offer to help, but they just took photos and video. Fucking owned, bitch, shouted a local transsexual Antifa militant and a member of the satanic Portland anti-fascists. I walked away half blinded to the county courthouse alongside Lonsdale Square before losing my balance. Later, in the emergency room of the Oregon Health and Science University Hospital, I found out my brain was hemorrhaging. Although my assault that day received national and international attention, I was hardly the only one to be brutally attacked. Well, no one was ever arrested or convicted for the attack on Andy Ngo, which easily could have killed him. I mean, brain hemorrhage is a very serious injury. Instead, oh, there's all this whimsical talk about milkshakes. Oh, isn't that amusing? Yes, throwing quick-drying cement on people. Very, very amusing indeed. Despite what was happening before our eyes, left-wing politicians and media denied Antifa played a role. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler called the movement imaginary during a congressional debate. Who caused the violence and protests? It wasn't Antifa, declared one gaslighting Washington Post fact-checker analysis, for example. And, okay, Meg Kelly and Elise Samuels. Yes, you will hear law enforcement officials say there's no such thing as Antifa. Well, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI for decades, insisted until the day he was finally pushed out of office that there was no such thing as the mafia. Why Hoover would have taken that position, God knows. God knows. We see from this book in great detail that Antifa are organized. They're well organized. They run training schools. People have to be thoroughly vetted before they're admitted, and they're given ideological indoctrination. They're given tactical indoctrination. They are given indoctrination with regard to removing themselves from public view, while given the tools to dox others. It is tempting, to consider these Antifa to be, romantic young men and women who've maybe gone too far, but are, good-hearted people. They are not. They are not. I mean, have you seen the pictures of these people when they're arrested? They almost all look deranged. And if I had my strongest criticism of this book relates to the quote by Herbert Marcuse that I uttered earlier, that sexual derangement seems to be at the heart of the Antifa movement. And of course, it's at the heart of Black Lives Matter as well. Look at the founders of Black Lives Matter. That, I don't know, through circumstances or chance, or perhaps by design, both BLM and Antifa have adopted the view that the destruction of bourgeois sexual morality is essential to revolution. And that, I guess, you start with the most basic things. We're not supposed to consider sexual relations of any kind important anymore. But of course, by design, they are at the very heart of our being and our order, of our culture, of our civilization. And of course, there's lots of celebrities name-checked in this book. While many recoiled at the shocking scenes of violence in Minnesota, a segment of the American population expressed open support for the riots. The Minnesota Freedom Fund, a far-left organization, raked in over $35 million in donations with the help of celebrities like Drake, Chrissy Teigen, and Steve Carell. Steve Carell, eh? I suppose there's a lot of people, right-wing people who love to rewatch The Office streaming. I suppose that's one of the things that we're going to have to do, is to make it clear that people like Steve Carell aren't going to get our business anymore. Antifa has become very good at disguising itself. Oh, no, we're anti-fascist. We stand against hate, and we stand against violence. Wait a minute, you're the people committing the violence. No. We are defending ourselves. Someone says something you don't like and you beat him up. Yes, because hate speech is violence. And the mere presence in any city, anytime, of people who are not anti-fascists is a threat, is a direct physical threat, which justifies reaction by any means necessary. Insurrection, yes, January 6th, insurrection. Well, there was a genuine insurrection in Seattle last summer, where 6 blocks in the Capitol Hill district were occupied by a group that was first called CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHOP, the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. No rules or laws applied here except for one: no cops allowed. Against all logic and reason, CHAZ was allowed by the city to run its course for more than 3 weeks. It was a large-scale experiment in anarchy, chaos, and brute force criminality. Various Occupy-type protests have occurred across the United States since the original occupation in Manhattan in 2011. But CHAZ is noteworthy for taking control of such a large and densely populated territory. Toward the end of its 24-day run, there were numerous assaults, robberies, and attempted rapes, 6 shootings, and 2 homicides. Yes, not to mention the people who lived there who were terrorized, and the people who had businesses there who were terrorized. And Mayor Durkin of Seattle, more evidence that America's become hereditary oligarchy. Her father, a political hack named Martin Durkin. Well, I remember him from my childhood. He was a very big deal in Washington politics for a long time. The governor, Jay Inslee, had no problem with CHAZ or CHOP. Durkin went so far as to talk about the advantages of CHAZ or CHOP. And fatuously, she said that it's not a lawless wasteland of anarchist insurrection. It's a peaceful expression of our community's collective grief and their desire to build a better world. She tweeted this on June 11th. Durkin, along with Governor Jay Inslee, both Democrats, had gone to great lengths to emphasize the peaceful nature of the occupation. In a CNN interview with Chris Cuomo, Durkin said infamously that Chad could be a summer of love. Yes. It took the police, a couple of hours to completely eliminate CHAZ or CHOP. But one has to ask the question why the mayor of Seattle and why the governor of Washington would put up with this for as long as they did. I'm not saying that they've been suborned. Maybe they just want the world to burn. Maybe they just want their own city, their own state to burn. I wouldn't be surprised by that. Maybe they think that they had better get on board with the revolution because the revolution is coming. There's no stopping it. So if they show themselves to be allies of the revolution, then they'll be spared when it occurs. And once again, I will commend to them to study the life of the Duc d'Orléans, known as Philippe Égalité. He was one of the top nobles of France, and he went so far to vote for the execution of the king and queen. And of course, that did not save him from the guillotine and the everlasting execration of all decent men and women. This book could have been better edited, I would say. The section on Antifa in Britain, it's superficial, and I don't think it's there's some inaccuracies in it. The skinhead movement, the musical skinhead movement in Britain England actually, it goes back to the 1960s, not the 1970s. And it's true enough that these skinheads, they loved Jamaican music. They loved ska and blue beat. His discussion, Andy Ngo's discussion of the German communists, uh, their invention of Antifa or anti-fascist action, is good. It's good, but it's really it's the stuff about America. It's about the decline or the dissolution of civic norms in America, which is the most valuable and the most eye-opening, even to me, who has, looked at this stuff pretty obsessively. Andy Ngo is an exceedingly brave man, and he is to be commended for this. And I recommend highly that you all get a copy, buy a copy of his book. As they say, forewarned is forearmed. So let's have a final look at the chat before I wrap it up for the week. Merkin Mufke, still the funniest name in movie history, says Anran. And this is, of course, the President of the United States, played by Peter Sellers in Stanley Kubrick's Doctor Strange Love. Don Willis says, femoids in power, the elephant in the room. It seems to be a rational person. When you got 6 blocks of your city taken over, 6 full blocks, and we're not talking about the inner city, the ghetto, or Dumpville. Capitol Hill is a wealthy neighborhood. It's also, alphabet people neighborhood. That the mayor would be thinking, what if this spreads? What if they start taking in one block, another block, another block? What about in other parts of town? What if Seattle becomes, a siege city? But no, Jenny Durkin says, a summer of love. White boy summer, rather, says Dawn Willis. Yeah, no, this is a response to Another Summer of Love by Dan. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Okay. One of the reasons I hate celebrities. Well, says Steve, yes, we don't hate them enough. Chadson, our valiant moderator, says, I was hit with a baggie full of quick dry cement on August 22nd in Seattle. It burns as it spreads over your skin and sucks the moisture out. Yes, but it was also amusing to the media. Let's call them milkshakes. Of course, actual milkshakes were dumped on Nigel Farage and other members of his party, and that was all very amusing too. Isn't it hilarious to have a cup of something cold and viscous dumped over your head or all over your suit jacket? I don't think these people have ever experienced that on themselves. It's not just the mess, okay, and the shock. It's the fear that people hate you that much that they would do such a thing. Hogan's Iron says, Devin Nunes had a really nice video about Antifa in the USA where he stressed origin in punk hardcore scene. Andy Ngo goes into that in his book, but Dennis Dale has written about this. I mean, to be blunt and to be profane, the overwhelming majority of these people are fucked in the head. I mean, again, look at the mug shots, and a great many of them seem to be sexual perverts. Now, okay, perhaps, I remember Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice, they were called, but they were, they went to, Rock Against Racism rallies or whatever and wore T-shirts, but they couldn't be arsed to get into direct action. I mean, real Antifa in America comes, long after punk rock peaked. Ogan Zaire says, KMG, still waiting for the story of Afro-punk giving birth to BLM. Okay, so what is coming up on the show next week? Well, first off, on Music Monday, I'm going to present a guide to collecting classical music, and I'm going to include a whole bunch of suggestions The idea is how to get the most music for the least amount of money. And on Theater Thursday next week, I'm going to be discussing a German miniseries from 1980. And it's directed by Rainer Werner Fassbinder. And it is based on a celebrated novel by Alfred Döblin. Is that correct? Yes. It's called Berlin Alexanderplatz. And on the book club next week, I'm going to be talking, this is a novel about the horror of contemporary China. It's by Maggie Shen King, and it is called An Excess Male. So that's all for today, all for this week. I shall be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be exceedingly gratefully received, given the uncertainty of my position, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, you can make a donation to the live stream directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.